Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Wednesday, April the 10th, 2024. Today I want to talk about the Mars-Saturn conjunction because today there is a Mars-Saturn conjunction in Pisces and it is quite a big deal. In some respects, it's one of the worst aspects in the book, at least theoretically. Mars is the lesser malefic, Saturn is the greater malefic. You put them together and we get the idea of frustration. Mars is quite an aggressive, assertive energy. Saturn is about structure. So it may be difficult to get things done, and we may feel that everything is hard work. And what happens if we have this in our horoscope? Well, lots of people have Mars-Saturn conjunctions in their horoscope and they survive. They may even be able to find ways of using the Mars-Saturn conjunction in a constructive way. Mars-Saturn, for example, can be very focused and very disciplined. But to get an idea about the Mars-Saturn conjunction, I want to look at a number of famous and infamous people who have this conjunction in their charts. Now, when you're talking about famous people, they tend to be different from people, certainly like me, who is not famous, obviously. If you're famous for a reason. And if you have a Mars-Saturn conjunction, that Mars-Saturn is likely to be a part of the reason why you are famous. And so we have to remember that when we look at famous people, there's a certain sense of exaggeration. So if I say something negative about Mars-Saturn on the basis of famous people, it doesn't necessarily mean anything for you if you happen to have a Mars-Saturn conjunction in your chart. It's just perhaps a very exaggerated way of looking at this pair of planets. But before I look at the Mars-Saturn conjunction in detail, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Wednesday, April the 10th, 2024. So here we have the chart for today. Top right, there are a few people who have Mars-Saturn conjunctions. There's Sam Bankman-Fried, bottom left. Top left, that's Victoria Beckham. Bottom right, that's Gonzalo Lira, the vlogger who died in a Ukrainian prison. And there is Elizabeth Holmes. What was it? Her company called Theranos. I think she's in prison now. Top right, that is Jesse Livermore, probably one of the most successful private investors of the 20th century, who he committed suicide in the end, but we'll talk about that later. So, as far as the moon is concerned, we see that the moon is at 17 Gemini, at least it's set for 17 Gemini, April the 10th, 2024, today at noon, set for New York. It's a great placing for the moon, really, being conjunct Jupiter. And in Taurus, moon is exalted in Taurus. When the moon is in Taurus, we get a great sense of stability. After all, Taurus is a fixed sign, and we can get a feeling that we've got both feet firmly on the ground. And it's a good antidote to the eclipse. You know, we had the eclipse on Monday, and there was all these concerns about it and what it might mean. Okay, it still means quite a lot. The impact of Monday's eclipse hasn't gone away. But the moon conjunct Taurus gives us a certain amount of certainty and reassurance, and perhaps allows some of us to focus on material details, or indeed the material world, and the fact that we can enjoy the material world, because Moon in Taurus is quite a sensual place for the Moon. I always get mixed up between sensual and sensuous, but I think that the Moon in Moon in Taurus in a way is probably both, and the Moon is making a conjunction to Jupiter, which is very fortunate. And it's interesting that today we have a very fortunate conjunction and a very unfortunate conjunction, traditionally speaking, of course, and that is a bit of a generalization. Yes, Moon in Jupiter is one of the most fortunate aspects in the book. Mars and Saturn is one of the most unfortunate aspects in the book. And yes, there is a Mars-Saturn conjunction today. Are we going to feel it? We could. It could be very frustrating, trying to get things done, perhaps, and it just isn't possible. We just might feel we're just not getting anywhere, that we're banging our head against a brick wall. And in certain quarters with the Mars-Saturn conjunction, there may be concerns about death and destruction. It is a pair of planets which is traditionally connected with dying and with really bad things happening. But the Mars-Saturn conjunction is not completely unusual. I mean, it does happen every couple of years, and the world survives. So I don't think we want to take the view that we're all doomed with Mars-Saturn conjunction. It's just that things are going to be difficult, and if things can go wrong, they will go wrong, and maybe there'll be news in terms of trouble spots in the world, and we'll see, if we want to look hard enough, that the world is, certainly in some quarters, a really bad place. Of course, I'm being negative, but of course with Mars-Saturn conjunction, you'd expect to be negative, wouldn't you? You'd expect to have a grim view of the world. I mean, you could go further. What's that quotation from Richard II? Let us talk of graves and worms and epitaphs. There might be a certain sense of that with the Mars-Saturn conjunction. But going back to the Moon is making a lot of aspects. The Moon sextiles Mars, sextiles Jupiter. The Moon sextiles Mars, sextiles Saturn, and the Moon conjuncts Jupiter and conjuncts Uranus. So that's kind of interesting, isn't it? The Moon is bringing together the Mars-Saturn conjunction with Jupiter. And with the Moon sextile Mars and Saturn, there may be a silver lining to all of this. Yes, the Mars-Saturn conjunction could be very frustrating, but the Moon in Taurus may, in certain situations, allow us to harness the power of the Mars-Saturn conjunction. So if something is hard work, don't panic. Even if you feel that you're hitting a real brick wall, there is action in the chart, because the Moon is making a sextile between Mars and Saturn. So if we keep going and we don't give up, it does seem as if in many cases we can get past the Mars-Saturn conjunction, because the Moon, having made that Mars-Saturn conjunction, makes a conjunction to Jupiter. So I don't think that Mars-Saturn conjunction is really the end of the world, at least as private individuals. I think it becomes more of a problem when you look at it from a perspective of wider society. So don't worry too much about this conjunction. Now, I suppose I should see if there's anything going on from a heliocentric perspective right now. And I'm just going to have a look at the heliocentric chart. So this is the chart from a perspective of the Sun in the center of the solar system. So there are a couple of things going on. Mercury is now opposition Chiron. I mean, I said Mercury was opposition Chiron yesterday, but right now it's getting pretty close. Mercury in terms of this part of the cycle, of its cycle around the sun, seems a bit slower than usual. There was a time when it seemed to be going at 6 degrees a day. It's not going at 6 degrees a day anymore. Mercury is opposition. So Mercury opposition Chiron, as I said yesterday, we may feel that in terms of how we communicate, there may be something wrong, something that we can't say that we want to say. Yet, Mercury is now Mercury is now starting to make a trine to Mars. So there is a way to express ourselves. And the things we say may be a bit unusual. As far as I'm concerned, Chiron is a maverick, can be a maverick. It's not just about the wounded healer, although being the maverick and being the wounded healer may in fact be part of the same thing. There is a wound, and we respond to this wound by perhaps behaving in a rather unusual way. We have a particularly unique way of seeing things, and perhaps that's how the Mercury opposition Chiron trine to Mars is working. So those are some thoughts on the heliocentric chart. There is something going on, but I don't really want to make a big deal about it. Okay, so having looked at the heliocentric position, I want to turn my attention to the 12 signs. And let me just get this back to the regular view, the geocentric view. And I want to give you now my forecast for today, Wednesday, April the 10th, 2024, for the 12 signs. Aries. There is a conjunction between Mars and Saturn today. I've been talking about it for the last couple of days, and it's here. Mars is your ruler, and it's conjunct Saturn. So it is possible that you feel somewhat frustrated. Getting things done could be really quite difficult, and certainly could take longer than expected. Though, in a way, it's fortunate that the Mars-Saturn conjunction is now exact. Very often in astrology, a conjunction gets more and more difficult until it becomes exact. And the moment it hits exactitude, there's a certain sense of relief that it's finally over, that you can now move on. So if things have been getting a little bit difficult over the last few days, it may be that really now is as bad as it gets, that things from now on are going to get easier for you. And yeah, you might just feel that you just can't get yourself out into the open as much as you would like. You can't be taken seriously, and things that should be easy just really take time. And it seems confusing because you feel that you're in the right place, that everything's in order, yet it just doesn't happen. So maybe you should consider what you might need to do to fix the problem. Is it possible, Aries, that you're being stubborn? It may be a situation where you know what the answer is deep down, but for one reason or another, you're just not doing anything about it. You feel you're not going to fix the problem in the way you know it can be fixed, and you're just being stubborn. When in actual fact, there's a solution staring you in the face, but it's a solution you don't want to consider. It is possible that the solution to something that's really bugging you has a price tag. Now, when I say a price tag, I'm absolutely not talking about a large amount of money. It may be that there's a smallish amount of money that you could spend that you're not spending. Maybe you need to buy something, maybe a piece of technology that would immediately solve a lot of your problems. Maybe you need to pay someone to do something for you, to help fix something. That's particularly if your problems are to do with stuff, things going wrong in a very mechanical sense. So that is a possibility. So do consider it. I'm not absolutely not talking about a large amount of money here. It's just an amount of money that you may be stubborn about not wanting to pay. So that is a consideration, a real possibility there. But in another way, perhaps what you need is a little bit of grounding, just to take a pause, not feel that you have to address the problem head on, but instead to just take a step back, not engage, and perhaps just come back to the problem maybe in a few hours' time. If you're thinking about the problem and you're really engaging in a problem, then you just look at it and then you just take a step back, make sure you're on secure grounding, and then have another look at things. And I think that things will seem a lot easier. And I do think, in general, though, that help is out there. And you should consider help from many different quarters. And it may not be help that you need to pay for. Consider the possibility that a member of your family has the answer. Is there someone in the past who you've found to be trustworthy, member of your family? They've helped you out. They seem to know what they're doing. For one reason or another, you haven't wanted to ask them. You asked them, and maybe the problem's solved. So don't take things too seriously. And don't feel that you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders. Though, as I said yesterday, the Mars-Saturn conjunction can be dangerous, and I would urge you not to take risks today, particularly physical risks. Doing dangerous stuff, rock climbing, hang gliding, jumping out of planes, that sort of stuff should be avoided, because it's a situation where if it can go wrong, it might well go wrong in practice. Taurus. There is a conjunction between the Moon and Jupiter today, and this conjunction is in Taurus. And that's good news. The Moon and Jupiter is a really very fortunate conjunction, and as a result of this conjunction, things should go your way, and you'll feel that you're in the right place, and you'll feel comfortable, and at the same time, I don't think much is going to bother you, which is nice, because one of the main aspects today is this Mars-Saturn conjunction. I was going on and on when I was talking to Aries. I was going on and on about the Mars-Saturn conjunction. But I don't think for you it's going to be a particularly big deal, especially if you're quite self-contained. You understand for sure that some things are difficult, but at the same time you also understand that if you just apply yourself, you'll be able to get things done, and even really difficult issues, difficult problems can be resolved. And I think with this Moon-Jupiter conjunction, because it's in your sign, you can be lucky, and the luck may come from nowhere. You're just minding your own business and something happens which really straight away you can take advantage of. And so in that sense, it looks like being quite a fortunate day. Having said that, there are things that could go wrong today, but it's up to you whether or not you take the risk, I think. Where there's people, there's trouble. And you could say that it might be best if people are at a bit of a distance, for a number of reasons. Firstly, you are attracting people who are unreliable. They say they're going to do something, they won't do it. They're going to be indecisive. They're going to make your life more complicated. I would therefore say, Taurus, that you need to consider whether or not you need certain people in your life. And right now, you don't, I think, need new people in your life. It's not a time for making new connections. It might seem exciting, but I think that you would be disappointed. Also, this Mars-Saturn conjunction needs to be considered in the light of other people. In a Taurian chart, Mars rules Scorpio. Scorpio is your opposite sign, and Scorpio therefore has a big connection with other people, and so does Mars. Mars may represent a partner, someone close to you, someone you have to deal with every day. I suppose it could represent something new who's starting to make their presence felt. And that Mars is making a conjunction to Saturn. And that Mars-Saturn conjunction could be about a person who is just difficult. They might have a lot of complaints. They might have a lot of frustrations. If you bring them into your life, they could take up a lot of your time, and there could be anger there, and there could be projected anger. That is a possibility. And by projected anger, I mean someone who's in a situation where things aren't going right and they need someone to blame, and that someone might be you. So consider that possibility and ask yourself whether you really want to bring new people or indeed old people into your life. And if you do, you need to take on the responsibility. Though on a positive note, I think you are in a position to help people out. You can do something to help resolve someone's problem, but you have to remember that not everyone wants to be helped. I mean, they can ask to be helped, they can demand to be helped, but if you actually try and help them, it's never good enough, and then you might feel that you're getting nowhere, and you might even be blamed for trying to help, because you'll say, oh, your help's no good, but you may be dealing with people that just can't be helped, but at the same time demand to be helped. And that would spoil your day, wouldn't it? And it would take away from your luck, because today can be lucky. So choose your company very carefully. Though certain people, if you know someone can be trusted, if someone's with you all the time, you know what you're dealing with, then okay, that's perhaps a different situation. Maybe you can have a positive influence, but it's just important not to get involved with people if you don't know what you're getting involved with, because it would be a shame to introduce a complication into your life that really isn't needed. Gemini. The Mars-Saturn conjunction today is certainly a big deal, and there is a question for you whether or not it's a good or a bad thing. I mean, in general, you'd say, well, having a Mars-Saturn conjunction is a problem, because it can be very frustrating. But for you, this Mars-Saturn conjunction is in a high-profile sector of your chart, often connected with being out there in society, perhaps with career, work. And I have a feeling that for certain Geminis, this Mars-Saturn conjunction might be quite useful, and it depends how you use it. Mars and Saturn as a pair they're hard work, and Saturn in particular, it demands to be taken seriously. So if you take a completely serious approach, and you say you're going to do such and such a task, and you're going to throw everything you've got into it, and you don't care how difficult it is or painful it is, and you don't care what other people think, in that case, I think that the Mars-Saturn conjunction could actually work extremely well for you. In a grim and grinding way, you're going to be able to get a lot done. On the other hand, if you were to take a light approach, half-hearted about everything, Gemini at its worst, then Mars-Saturn could be a problem. If you don't take life seriously, life is not going to take you seriously. And life could actually be somewhat offended by you and just brush aside your concerns, and things may just not happen, and you may just feel in the end that you're wasting your time, and at best and at worst you just feel completely frustrated and you end up getting nowhere. Which underlines my point. If you're going to do something today, you've got to do it properly, and you've got to do it very thoroughly, and you've got to cover everything. Any sloppy thinking, sloppy behavior will get punished, I think, with that Mars-Saturn conjunction. So, in a way, Gemini, it is up to you. And although this Mars-Saturn conjunction is or can be about work and career and about what you do in a public setting, you always need to keep part of yourself private. You don't need to show everything to the outside world. And a bit of behind-the-scenes work can help you deal with some of the perhaps frustrations of the day. So you see there's a problem. You don't have to sort out the problem in the bright lights in front of everyone. You can see, oh yeah, this needs to be dealt with. You retreat into your private space. You work on it. You perhaps see if the universe provides a few solutions. You get the solutions, and you're able to actually turn things round, and in the end show everyone how clever you are. But it's not really just about being clever. It's about being persistent and working really hard. So that, I think, is the best way of dealing with the day's energies. At the same time, there is a sense of grimness about Gemini, because Gemini is at the moment, quite aware of what's going on in the world, and there is a feeling when you look around you of tragedy. I don't mean personal tragedy. I'm just talking about when you actually start to think about what people are doing around the world. Okay, it may be in your community, but it might be what happens when you look at the news. You do get a feeling of that that things are not going well in society, and that this tragedy, it maybe just be being the tragedy of being alive. And I suppose there might be an existential sense to that, remembering that Jean-Paul Sartre, the existentialist philosopher, was of course a Gemini, and he talked about the absurdity of life and perhaps the tragedy of life. And it's nothing personal, but I think that's something that might have an influence on you. It's the sort of the background noise, but I really must emphasize I'm not talking about anything personal. It's just your perceptions about the world in which you're living. Finally, I should say something about relationships. I think that it can be a good day for relationships, but in an understated way. I think that you and other people can get closer, but it's not about anything obvious. It's about just having a practical and grounded approach which gets appreciated, and that's what matters. And in terms of judging any relationship, you have to consider what is its basis, where is the grounding, and what are you and another person actually working towards in a material sense. And if you can identify that common ground and work with it, then I really do think that relationships can prosper. Cancer. The moon is in Taurus, and it's in conjunction to Jupiter. Now remember that the moon is your ruler. So with a moon-Jupiter conjunction in Taurus, I would have said that in many respects things are going your way, and you will have more than your fair share of luck. And I think you'll be helped also by the fact that the moon is moving towards a conjunction with Uranus. So it's kind of moving towards the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. And Jupiter-Uranus as a pair are lucky, and that luck can happen quickly and can happen surprisingly. And it's just very important that you put yourself in a position where you can take advantage of everything that is on offer. If you stay in one place, as I think in some respects you might be inclined to do, but I don't think that's the right thing to do. I think that if you create many different opportunities for yourself, then your chances of getting things to work your way are certainly greatly improved. And in terms of your social life, people are going to like you, people are going to be attracted to you, because you're going to be a comforting influence. Someone who can be trusted, someone who's not going to do anything crazy, and who is going to honour their promises. And that's important. The moon is your ruler. It's in Taurus. Taurus is a fixed sign. If you say you're going to do something, you're able to do it. Then there is the question about how you relate to people on a one-to-one level. Now, from a Cancerian perspective, Capricorn is your opposite sign. And the ruler of Capricorn is Saturn, and Mars is making a conjunction to Saturn. Now, we might interpret that as saying, well, Saturn represents another person. Mars is conjunct Saturn. That might be a person who is angry, or a person who is under pressure, or perhaps a person who is accident prone. a number of ways in which that can work. So do consider that when looking at all the various one-to-one contacts you have in your life, whether it be fleeting contacts, meeting someone, you have an interaction, then they move away, it could be like that, or it could be someone that you're with all the time, that you've been with for ages, perhaps a partner, perhaps a spouse. But it does seem that someone close to you does seem to be a little angry about something, and you have to work out what you can do. Now, the moon makes a sextile to the Mars-Saturn conjunction. The Mars-Saturn conjunction is in Pisces, the moon is in Taurus. That is a sextile relationship because you're dealing with two signs apart. And so if you're given the opportunity, you can in many ways diffuse the situation. You can make someone feel better about themselves. If someone is angry about one particular thing, you can pick up on this anger and engage with the anger and perhaps help someone to calm down. But in some cases, it may be impossible, particularly if you feel that someone is not able to trust you, is not letting go, is not allowing anyone to get anywhere close to their boundaries. In that case, there's nothing you can do, and you're dealing with a person that can't be helped. And so, Cancer, you have to actually recognize such a person when you come across them, and just use your sensitivity. Always ask the question, can this person be helped? Does this person want to be helped? Or are you dealing with someone who's just putting up defense mechanisms that are just so dense that you're never going to get through them, so what's the point in bothering? And you might as well not waste your time. But that is a negative scenario, and I think in many cases you can be a really helpful influence. And as I've said, people are going to like you, and I think if you have a busy social life, if you meet lots of different people, then I think that you're going to feel happy, and I think at the same time you're going to feel that you're going to be doing something that is useful. Leo, you are in many respects in a good position because there is a conjunction between the moon and Jupiter. It's in Taurus, and from a Taurean perspective, from a Leo perspective, Taurus is quite a high-profile sign. It's about recognition. It's about doing something in the public eye. Can be about work, career, business, and the Moon-Jupiter conjunction in Taurus. In fact, it's not just a Moon-Jupiter conjunction in Taurus, it's a Moon-Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Taurus. So we've got a growing Jupiter-Uranus conjunction happening, coming together pretty soon. And the Moon brings it all together. Or the Moon makes a conjunction of Jupiter, makes a conjunction of Uranus. And this really does allow you to have an impact. So Taurus, I think it's just so Leo, it's just important that you're out there and you are trying your hardest to be successful, and that you don't allow private worries to get you down. That doesn't mean to say you shouldn't have private worries, that you have these inner concerns that maybe you haven't got what it takes, or that now is not the right time. And in some respects, these concerns are legitimate. Nothing is simple. And these concerns have been building up. But at the same time, these concerns show a fundamental sense of realism. And I think today, in terms of whatever you're doing, you can address the concerns and actually realize that these concerns can be the building blocks of actually something very useful by demonstrating to other people that you have your worries, that you are concerned that things might go wrong. People might actually take you seriously. So what you're doing is you are taking some of the negativity of the Mars-Saturn conjunction, which I've been talking about so much in this video. You're taking those concerns, that negativity, you are expressing that negativity, and because other people have these concerns about the Mars-Saturn conjunction, it's affecting everyone. People think, oh, this person, this Leo knows what's going on. This Leo is addressing our kinds of concerns. And so because you're able to address everyone's concerns, which are also your concerns, you're going to be taken seriously. And your realism will, I think, make you new friends and will allow people to trust you. And this is great. And so it's an example of turning things round, turning what could be a problem into a real advantage. And at the same time, you shouldn't feel that you have to do everything on your own, because at the moment you are attracting clever people who've got some incredible skills, whether it's in terms of art or business or writing, whatever. And skillful people can really help you out. And indeed, Leo, I think today you can really bring out the best in people. Maybe what you can do is show an empathy with whatever is holding someone back. And through that empathy, you can help unblock something. And then the next stage is being able to release something. So you can bring out the best in people. And that does mean that if you are in a position of leadership today, I think that you are going to be very effective. And so, Leo, whatever your misgivings, consider what kind of leadership you can show. You might think that no one's going to take you seriously, but really they are going to take you seriously. So hopefully you will address yourself to the challenge, because I think it could be quite a powerful day for you. Virgo. Well, Virgo, we've just had the eclipse, haven't we? And a lot of people have been feeling a bit negative about it. And then we've got this Mars-Saturn conjunction. And so this Mars-Saturn conjunction, which is exact today, could have an impact on you. I mean, very simply, this Mars-Saturn conjunction is in Pisces. It's in your opposite sign. It's in a sign that is connected with other people and outside events, things that you don't necessarily have a great deal of control over. And you might find today that you are, to an extent, held up by other people's frustrations and complaints, and people want to be taken seriously, and they maybe want you to spend time on them. So, what do you do about this situation? I think when you're dealing with people who you don't fully understand today, you have to be really careful. I think that just there are some individuals out there who could really grind you to a standstill. That is possible. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but you have to consider that possibility. And it's particularly the case if you start giving time to someone. Consider who are you giving your time to? Okay, if you're giving someone a minute of your time, that's okay. 5 minutes can turn into 10 minutes, can turn into a whole day wrecked. So you really have to be cautious there. At the same time, there are things you can do to mitigate the problem. And you have to take advantage, perhaps, of the conjunction between the Moon and Jupiter. Now, there are 2 conjunctions today. Okay, with the Moon Jupiter, to an extent, depends on your time zone, but Moon and Jupiter are both in Taurus, regardless of your time zone. Okay, if you're in the United States, or if you're in New York, for example, there is an exact Moon-Jupiter conjunction this afternoon. If you're in Europe, it will be a bit later. But the Moon conjunction is still around in one shape or form, even if you're in Australia or New Zealand. It's there. And this Moon-Jupiter conjunction is almost an antidote to the Mars-Saturn conjunction. And it's how you deal with the world around you. And if people are being difficult, what do you do? What can you do? It is possible, because the Moon is making a sextile aspect to Mars and Jupiter, that you can in some way turn the situation round. You can listen to what someone is saying, listen to what someone is complaining about, and then feed it back to them, but in a different way, and help them to get a perspective, because some people don't have a perspective, and you do have a perspective. And by perspective, I mean looking at things in the grand scheme of things. And I know that Virgo does have a certain reputation for perhaps focusing too much on small details, not being able to see the wood for the trees and all that kind of thing. But I don't think today. I think that today Virgo has a good sense of perspective. And what seems to another person to be the end of the world, to you is actually something rather trivial when you look at the broad picture. And perhaps that's what you should be trying to do. You should be trying to explain to people the broad picture. So if someone's complaining about something, give it context. And maybe when you give a complaint context, the other person is going to accept that context and realize that perhaps they're complaining about nothing. Although, as I've been saying to other signs, a couple of other signs, there are certain people that can't be helped. And the sooner you're aware of that, the better. But in many cases, I think that your words of wisdom can be very powerful. Just don't get caught up in detail. And really, you don't have to get caught up in detail, because there is a conjunction between the Moon and Jupiter. And in some cases, this conjunction between the Moon and Jupiter may be quite spiritual. Don't ignore your spirituality today. Remember, this is a very spiritual time. We have just had this eclipse on Monday, and we've got this Mars-Saturn conjunction, which is certainly highlighting some of the problems of the world. And if we completely focus on the short-term problems of the world, we're never going to get anywhere. If we can get a broad spiritual picture, it's going to make things a lot easier. And I think today, Virgo, you can tune into that broad spiritual picture. Okay, you're not going to be an atheist, are you? Because you're watching me. You wouldn't have got this far in this video if you were an atheist. You do, I assume, believe in something beyond yourself. And whatever that thing is beyond yourself today is very present. After all, the moon is conjunct Jupiter. The Greek for Jupiter is, I think, Dios. It means God. So there is something godly about today. The supernatural is close. And if anyone can pick up on the supernatural, then it's got to be you. But I'm not talking about any sort of weird psychic stuff or weird events, ghosts, whatever. I'm talking about some supernatural, wider being that you can really connect with. And hopefully you can, in your own way, help other people you can help other people to connect with this wider supernatural entity, whatever it might be, and that might help them to understand that whatever they're going through, it's nothing. It's just in the infinity of things, it's something very short term. Libra, be careful who you associate with. That's my first warning. Maybe that's my only warning. I think that today some people can be really difficult. Part of it is because of this Mars-Saturn conjunction. The Mars-Saturn conjunction it's exact today, and Mars has a special connection with other people in the Libran horoscope, because Mars rules Aries. Aries is your opposite sign, and Mars is conjunct Saturn. And with Mars conjunct Saturn, yes, there are some people who are really quite frustrated, and they may want to take their frustrations out on you. So if you're in a relationship, be extra careful. Look at the dynamics of a relationship. Ask yourself, what has been happening over the last few days? Because over the last few days, Mars has been getting closer and closer to Saturn. Has another person's behavior been changing? Has it been changing for the worse? I suppose if it has been changing for the worse, maybe today might be as bad as it gets, because Mars makes the exact conjunction to Saturn. And yes, if you spend too much time with one person, you may really start to feel that Mars conjunct Saturn. And it's possible that in an extreme situation that one person is able to make your life a complete misery, if you were to let them. But you don't have to let them. I think it's just important that you do keep some distance from other people, and you're careful about who you bring into your life. I think there is some possibility that other people are just difficult. Difficult, not just in the sense of frustration in that Mars-Saturn kind of way, but also somewhat unreliable. You meet people, they make promises, they say they're going to do things, they seem to show commitment, but very soon you realize it's all hot air. So I would in general just be wary of everyone and really respect your own resources. You have, after all, considerable resources, and these resources don't necessarily have to be shared. In fact, if you spend time in your own space, you can start to benefit from a conjunction between the Moon and Jupiter. The conjunction between the Moon and Jupiter is a bit of an antidote to the conjunction between Mars and Saturn. Mars and Saturn is quite a difficult conjunction, as I've just been trying to explain in relation to other people. The Moon Jupiter conjunction is very fortunate, and it can give you a certain amount of emotional intensity, but I mean that in an entirely favourable sense. You can really tune into your feelings and the power of your feelings, and through the power of your feelings you can actually understand what needs to be done, and you can start to understand the truth of certain matters. Now, I talk about feelings, but feelings can actually engage with the material world. So, for example, if you are presented with something very material, I don't know, a spreadsheet, for example, just a row of numbers, you can look at a row of numbers and the numbers will make perfect sense. They may not have made perfect sense yesterday, but today suddenly you see the number that matters. And this does allow you, Libra, to get deeply into things that just other people are not interested in. But for some reason, you're interested in it. I know that's not a usual Libra thing. Librans very often like to skim the surface. But today, I wouldn't skim the surface, because deep down, there are some really interesting things you need to uncover. Of course, don't take me literally. I'm not saying you should dive into lakes and anything like that. I'm being metaphorical here. But if you go deep down, you can discover really important things. And with the Moon making a conjunction to Uranus, there might even be a revelation. And these important things may relate to your own life, your own fortune, how you're trying to sort out your life. They could also relate to another person. In fact, the Moon is making a sextile to Mars. And I know I've been quite negative so far about you and other people, and I've given you warnings, that you've perhaps got to have a bit of distance, but perhaps through the power of your feelings, you can unlock something in relation to another person, and you can find the secret of another person. And once you're able to find that secret, you'll understand what makes someone tick. And once you understand what makes someone tick, you're then in a position to act in the right way. You may realize what someone is about, and this may mean that you can start to trust them, even if on the surface that they seem to be being quite sort of negative and difficult. On the other hand, you might understand that someone is up to no good and is not good for you, and it might be a powerful and liberating revelation. Finally, I suppose I have to say something about your health. Mars and Saturn making this conjunction in Pisces, this could have an impact on health matters. I would advise you not to do anything today which is going to cause strain. Don't do anything persistent. Don't exercise too much. Don't eat too much. Don't do anything excessive today. And I suppose be particularly careful if you're out walking or running. As I sometimes say to Libra, because the thing about Libra is that the sixth house from Libra is Pisces. And of course, in astrology, the sixth house is connected with health. It's also connected with the feet. And I've said this to Libra before, and I'll say it again. You've got a Mars-Saturn conjunction in Pisces. This could focus on the feet. And so, Libra, you really need to look after your feet today. Not just today. Hopefully you've been looking after your feet over the last few days, but your feet may be particularly vulnerable. And so, be careful about walking, doing anything repetitive with your feet. Have a good look at your shoes. Is there something wrong with your shoes? Is there, I don't know, a stone in your shoe? Whatever you're wearing on your feet, just so pay some attention there. Look, in all probability, actually nothing is going to happen. There are going to be no health issues, but I suppose it's my responsibility to just look at the thing from an absolute worst possible scenario and just say, well, be careful how you go. There's some indication that you might strain yourself or take on too much. It's not just your feet, maybe picking something up that's too heavy. Just be careful in that sense. Mars and Saturn conjunction is about a heavy load causing damage. That is one interpretation of it. So, Libra, don't do anything extreme, at least on a physical sense. In fact, in any sense, but I'm particularly focusing on the physical side of things there. Scorpio. As you know by now, there is a conjunction between Mars and Saturn, and Mars is your ruler. So, if there's a conjunction between Mars and Saturn, and Mars is your ruler, that does mean that today could be quite frustrating. And I've been warning you about this over the last couple of days, that as this Mars conjunct Saturn has been getting closer, there may have been an increasing amount of frustration, and it may have been difficult to get things done. And that is certainly one way of looking at it. But I think we have to try to be positive with the Mars-Saturn conjunction. Saturn as a planet is often about responsibility and structure. And perhaps what you need to be doing now is creating structure. Because if you don't create structure, and you don't create a bit of really discipline, things could get really frustrating. So Scorpio, if you are engaged in something that's difficult, you can't do it in a chaotic way. I mean, I think as a Scorpio, you probably know that, because Scorpio is a fixed sign, but you do need to do things according to a system. But if you can do things according to a system, and you can bring a new system in, new structures in, then I think you can definitely benefit. So if you start to create structure and a system right now for your many activities, particularly activities connected with your creativity, you are a creative person, particularly at the moment. After all, Mars is your ruler, it's going through Pisces. From a Scorpio perspective, Pisces is a very creative sign, but your creativity may have hit a bit of a block, and you're wondering, well, what now? You may not be getting the feedback you'd like, but this block may actually be quite useful. It's there for a purpose. You've now got to create some structure, and you've got to perhaps create some time. If you want to do something, you're going to have to give it time, maybe even a time slot. And from now on, you can start to create that time slot and make sure that you give yourself the opportunity to be creatively successful. And from tomorrow onwards, when the Mars-Saturn conjunction starts to break up, when Mars having made the conjunction moves away from Saturn, it may be that your efforts to create structure really start to show their first results. At the same time, you should not take the view that you are alone, because today there's a conjunction between the Moon and Jupiter, and it's in Taurus, it's in your opposite sign, and that can represent help from outside. And Scorpios, they can be quite private people. They like to do things in their own way, and they can be a little untrusting. Can this person be trusted? Maybe I can sort it all out myself. But help is available, and high quality help. It may be, but we're talking about someone you know well, but you haven't fully confided in them. I mean, if they don't know that you're working on something, that you've got something bothering you, well, how can you expect them to help? But if you explain to them what's going on and the issues you're having, you may be surprised with the response. And it's quite possible that through another person's intervention, you might have a situation that becomes really very positive. You hadn't imagined it could get positive, but there could be a real transformation, and a transformation that is certainly for the better. And in general, I do think that relationships should work very well today because of this conjunction between the Moon and Jupiter. And you should be open to surprises. After all, the Moon doesn't just make a conjunction to Jupiter in Taurus, your opposite sign. It also starts making a conjunction to Uranus in Taurus, your opposite sign. Uranus is a planet of surprises. So it's just important that you don't have fixed views about other people. There is scope for surprise, and there is scope for pleasant surprises. And right now, you are attracting unexpected events of a social nature, which could just come out of nowhere. And looking at the overall chart, I think that these events should be able to work in your favour. Just don't spoil it, because another way of looking at the Mars-Saturn conjunction is Mars conjunct Saturn, you're just a bit too serious. There's nothing wrong with seriousness. I've just talked about the importance of having structure. But don't let your sense of seriousness put other people off. That seriousness is there for you, to help you work things out for yourself. It's not there to create concrete boundaries. You don't want to build the Berlin Wall around you. That's not what it's about. You have to allow people to interact with you. That is important if you want to make the most of what's going on today. Sagittarius, you might feel today that you want to just stay at home, stay somewhere that you know and trust. I'm not convinced that's a good idea. The problem, Sagittarius, is that today there is a conjunction between Mars and Saturn. And this conjunction between Mars and Saturn is in Pisces. And from a Sagittarian perspective, the sign Pisces is often connected with the home. It's where you feel safe. Your domestic environment. And so with Mars a Mars-Saturn conjunction, if you go to the place that you feel safest in particular your home, you may not get the happiness and the satisfaction that you were expecting because of this conjunction between Mars and Saturn. You may immediately feel quite frustrated and stuck, and just a feeling that you can't really get anything done. And Sagittarius can sometimes fall into this sort of negative swoon. It can happen for Sagittarians, and you don't want that to happen. You need to have action. If you go to your comfort zone, and what feels like your comfort zone may actually turn into a prison today. I therefore suggest that when you're looking at what's going on today, you make sure that you have more than one thing planned, 2 or 3 things planned. And ideally, those 2 or 3 things should be in different locations, because we need to keep things moving. I think that's really important. I know you want to stay in one place, but we need to keep things moving, because if you stay in one place for too long, there's going to be negativity, and you're going to start feeling sorry for yourself. And that does mean that today good planning is essential. You need to have an hour-by-hour diary. And the creation of that planning is facilitated by a conjunction between the Moon and Jupiter in Taurus. Remember, Jupiter is your ruler. It's in Taurus. That's a very down-to-earth, stable sign. Moon is making a conjunction to Jupiter as well. And so that Moon-Jupiter conjunction is going to allow you to create a schedule for yourself which allows you enough action to stop this inertia bringing you down. And what you really don't want is emotional inertia. Because if you are in one place, then potentially your emotions are in one place, and you get stuck with one set of feelings, and those feelings don't go away. They just go round and round and round, and it just becomes increasingly negative. But if you're moving from between places, that means that you're moving between emotional states. And if you can move between emotional states, that means that you're not going to get obsessive. And if you're feeling down in one place, you're unlikely to feel down in another place. And so action and movement really is the spice of life. And as a Sagittarius, I think you knew that already. You know that already. And you need to be very conscious of that. Just consider what your sign is all about. Your sign is all about having variety. And so whatever you're doing today, getting that variety is essential. Capricorn. There is a conjunction between Mars and Saturn, which I've been telling everyone. I've been going on and on about this conjunction between Mars and Saturn. And it certainly affects you, because Saturn is your ruler and Mars is making the conjunction to Saturn. The question is this a good or a bad thing? One might say that it was a bad thing, because Mars is quite an aggressive planet, and it is aggravating you, it's frustrating you, it's annoying you. That's one way of looking at it, and certainly there is scope, Capricorn, for you to feel agitated. But Mars might be actually energizing. Mars is the energy planet. It's moving towards a conjunction to Saturn. Something is trying to energize you. And if you're being energized, that can work in two ways. If you're being energized, that just could make you feel angry. You've got all this energy, what's it for? It's a waste of time, but you still feel angry. Alternatively, it could be the impulse to do something. And I think that's going to really matter today. You have to be doing something. Because there is this energy impacting you, and if it's not used, then it's just going to cause problems. It's going to be frustrating. So you've got to find a way of focusing this excess energy. And there are certainly a number of ways of doing it. It may well be that you need to talk to people in quite an animated way. And I think that this conversation needs to be about something constructive, about how you and other people can use your talents. It is a time, Capricorn, where you need to make constructive use of your talents. If talents are not used, then they become frustrations because you get annoyed with yourself for not using what you've got. And so when you're with other people, maybe this is something you need to discuss. It may be you need to make a couple of short journeys. Though be careful, if you make short journeys, I'm a bit wary of making that advice, giving that advice, because on one hand, just moving from place to place could be quite useful, could be quite helpful, could give you a sense that you're spreading your message in different places. On the other hand, short journeys, with this Saturn conjunction between Mars and Saturn, every time you drive around, there's always that extra chance of an accident. Mars-Saturn conjunction is often associated with accidents, so the elevated risk of accident aside, several short journeys might be useful. So if you are taking lots of short journeys, just be careful how you go, and be extra careful. Be extra careful with driving. Of course, this affects everyone. It's not just Capricorn, but the key thing is to make constructive use of your energy, because I do think you do have a lot of energy. Another way is to consider the fact that the moon is making a sextile to Saturn. It's also making a sextile to Mars. And of course, from a Capricorn view, the moon can be about relationships, can be about other people. So there may be someone out there who can really help you to make use of all the energy you've got. In fact, I think that probably is the case. When you're with someone else, the right kind of person, someone you like, someone you respect, someone who is also fun, who has lots of good ideas, when you're with that person, you find a way of really using your energy and using it in a way that just feels good. And I should say that with the moon sextile Saturn, depending on your situation, that can be very good for close relationships, can be good for romance, meeting someone new, and perhaps what you need with this Mars-Saturn conjunction is you need to have the right people around you. When you have the right people around you, people who are on your wavelength, then really there'll be nothing to complain about. Aquarius. When I talk about Aquarius, there's often an overlap with Capricorn. And the reason for that overlap is the fact that Saturn rules both Saturn and... that Saturn rules both Capricorn and Aquarius. And, I was just saying to Capricorn that, they had to consider the Mars-Saturn conjunction. And so Aquarius, this Mars-Saturn conjunction today does have an impact on you. And, we can say that, okay, Saturn is you, Mars is potentially some outside force. It could be quite an aggravating force. So you do have to bear that in mind. Something could happen that just annoys you. It might have a financial dimension. I think I was saying that yesterday. Where there's money, there's trouble. And I think if possible, you should avoid financial issues today, because they might be more trouble than they're worth. Especially if other people are involved. Having to discuss money with people, it could be really unsatisfying. I suppose, though, if you take an approach that you've got to ground yourself, financially, then maybe you can do some useful work. But it all has to be done on your terms. You perhaps need to just spend some time on your own, looking at your personal finances, perhaps, but not really engaging other people yet. Because, as I've just said, where there's money, there's trouble. And I just do think that trouble is most likely to come about when you're having to talk to other people about money. And on a broader sense, I've talked about security. Security is the way forward at the moment. There is a Moon-Jupiter conjunction. And this Moon-Jupiter conjunction, from an Aquarius perspective, is about grounding yourself. And Aquarius, I really do think that you do have the opportunity to do this. It might be a good idea to spend more time than usual at home, or to consider the people who are really important to you, particularly your family. At times your family might seem boring, they might seem to restrict your freedom of action, but right now I think that your family can be really useful and helpful and also somewhat comforting. So be ready to interact with members of your family and other people who you know really well. I mean, not just well, but incredibly well, because they may give you a new perspective, and at the same time, I think they're going to be quite reassuring. What I think you probably shouldn't do today, Aquarius, is do anything that is outside the norm. You have a pattern of your life. You have things that you're used to doing. If you do something that is unusual, that is daring, then at best it's not going to be satisfying. At worst, it could actually backfire. So things that are large scale and are ambitious should, I think, be avoided, because I just can't see them working. And at worst, they could cause you a lot of problems. So just concentrate today, Aquarius, on what you know and trust. Now, that might not be what you want to hear. Aquarius can be quite a curious sign. It's perhaps looking for a bit of excitement and adventure, but no, not really. That's not a good idea in most cases. And if you just stick to what you know and trust, then I think that things should be fine. And we also just need to remember that there is a sextile between the moon and Saturn. Saturn is your ruler. The moon is making a fortunate aspect. The moon is about security. The moon is about things you trust. It's those things that you trust, the things that have worked for you in the past, that are going to work for you again, and I think they're going to work for you today. Pisces. There is a conjunction today between the moon and Jupiter. This conjunction between moon and Jupiter did start to form yesterday, but today it should be there. It does depend on your time zone to an extent. If you're Australia, New Zealand, okay, that might be more into tomorrow. So there's a certain time zone issue, but still, moon and Jupiter are in the same sign, and Jupiter is your ruler. And I think what this means for Pisceans is that they're going to be fairly comfortable, just comfortable in whatever they're doing. And this Moon-Jupiter conjunction links up with a Mars-Saturn conjunction. And I have been talking a lot about this Mars-Saturn conjunction, because what happens is that the moon makes a sextile to the Mars-Saturn conjunction, because the moon is 2 signs apart from Mars and Saturn. The moon is in Taurus, and the Mars-Saturn conjunction is in Pisces. So the moon makes a sextile to the Mars-Saturn conjunction, and then it makes the conjunction to Jupiter. Now, normally, the Mars-Saturn conjunction is quite a difficult influence, but I don't think for you it necessarily is, because it's in your sign. It could be a problem. I'm not saying it won't be a problem, but it gives you a lot of strength, I think, having a Mars-Saturn conjunction, in terms of how other people see you. You'll give the impression of being in control. And if you take the Mars-Saturn conjunction seriously as something that allows you to be in control, and you also take the view that it's a serious world and the world has risks, then you'll give the impression that you know what you're doing. It won't be light. You don't seem to be a particularly light person at the moment. There are certainly grave and serious things to be thinking about. And that is how you're going to come across. And I think that is absolutely the right way to come across. And with the moon making a sextile to Mars and Saturn, I think you have a chance to really communicate the seriousness of it all. When you talk, you don't have to use too many words, but it will be clear that you understand. And this is not typically Piscean. I know that Pisces has a certain reputation for being a little bit chaotic, being all over the place, easygoing. No, not at the moment, I don't think. It's a very un-Piscean time, and I mean that in a positive sense. Saturn, after all, has been moving through your sign since March of last year. So it's been moving through your sign for over a year. So you're getting used to this new Saturnine, disciplined energy moving through Pisces, and now Mars comes to a conjunction of Saturn, and you're now feeling that it really is part of you, and it's almost part of the way you want to express yourself right now. You want to express yourself in a way that is saying, look, we live in serious times. Let's be serious. And I think people are going to pick up on that, and they're going to say, yes, Pisces is serious. So if you want something done today, you can you can get it done, and it's your gravitas that is going to make all the difference. But I'm not saying it's not going to be a fun day. It can be a fun day. I mean, there's a conjunction between the moon and Jupiter. You may, at the very least, enjoy taking a serious approach, but once everything is happening on your terms, and I think it can happen on your terms, you can create a situation that is really quite stimulating. Perhaps, you can engage with other people, though I don't think you should get too close to any one person. Certain people are just, they can be as serious as you can. Some people seem to think that the world is in a state of collapse. I don't think the world is in a state of collapse, or rather, you probably don't think the world is in a state of collapse. You take the view that the world could be in a state of collapse, but if you can create a certain sense of structure and discipline, helped by the Mars-Saturn conjunction in Pisces, then this is the kind of problem that can be avoided. So overall, Pisces, I think that you're in control today, and I think that's what matters. That's the astrology, and I now want to look at the day from the perspective of the I Ching. And so I ask the question, what is Wednesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this YouTube video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 50, the cauldron. Hexagram 50 is seen to be quite a powerful hexagram. I think when Carl Jung did the I Ching for the very first time, he got the cauldron as his hexagram, and I think when he wrote, I think it was the introduction or the foreword to Wilhelm's I Ching, this is what he talked about. The cauldron represents all of our talents, everything put together, all of our abilities put into a cauldron, and it's like bringing everything together. And really, that's what we should be doing today. That should be our focus. We can't be chaotic about it. And this reminds us of the fact that there is a conjunction between Mars and Saturn. And so the Mars-Saturn conjunction is about structure. We cannot be sloppy with a Mars-Saturn conjunction. We have to bring things together. If today, Mars-Saturn conjunction, we also got a Moon-Jupiter conjunction. So Moon-Jupiter, there is a positive side to that, which perhaps represents everything we can achieve, everything we have achieved in the past, and you put it together. Mars-Saturn, that's what Mars-Saturn wants to do, and the cauldron is about containing it. It's containing what we have, and again, Mars and Saturn in some respect is about containment. The cauldron is almost a containment vessel, isn't it? And with its Saturn is trying to bring us together, and Mars is just trying to get out. And we have two moving lines here. Second line and the third line. Second line moves. This is saying that when we consider what we're good at, and what we want to shout about, we should be focusing only on what we really are good at. Do not focus on what we're not good at. Don't make claims that way. And the I Ching tells us that if we don't make claims about things we are not good at, then envy and resentment from outside shouldn't bother us. If we really are good at something, that's what we're good at, then we don't have to worry what other people are saying. On the other hand, if we're claiming we've got an ability that we don't, what we feel a bit uncomfortable with, and other people are envious of us, envious of our claims, then we've got trouble, because the basis of our claims, the basis, if you like, of our advertising, it's a false, because we're falsely advertising who we are and what we can do, and we've been spotted, then we're in trouble. So second line, really just concentrate on what we're good at. That's what we should be focusing on. Then the third line moves. Third line is not so fortunate. The third line represents the handles of the cauldron. And so in the cauldron, we've got everything is in there. Everything we've got, all our abilities are in the cauldron. And we think about the handles, and the handles are broken. So that indicates if we've got a boiling hot cauldron with all our talents are in there, and the handles are broken. So we've got a problem there, because however clever we are, we don't have access. I don't know if you... it's like, I don't know if you play bridge. I haven't played bridge for years. It's like you've got a brilliant hand, but I might have my hand is full of spades. I've got aces, kings and queens, but I don't have the initiative. I'm not the one leading the contract. It's all in other suits. It's all the other suits that are winning, with diamonds and so my spades, just as the hands, just as the bridge game goes on, I can never use them, and in the end I have to start discarding really good cards and I lose the hand. So that might be how it is. I don't know how well that bridge analogy really works, but what do you do with the problem of these broken handles? But the broken handles can be fixed. So what we have to do is we have to fix the handles. And so it's like we've got an ability and it's not being used, and we have to find a way of we have to find a way of getting that ability out into the open. And so we need to consider how we are interacting with the world, perhaps how we are advertising ourselves, how we are presenting ourselves. Those are the handles. So we have to address that. And when we address that, things will start moving and will start getting appreciated. Now, because we've got two moving lines, we move to a second hexagram. And the hexagram is contentment, 16. Now, 16, contentment, that is Greg Winkup's translation. He calls 16 contentment. The Wilhelm translation calls it enthusiasm. Sorry about that little blemish there on the top line. I accidentally put a broken line in and I had to fix it. The contentment is about feeling okay. We might feel that we're being recognised, perhaps. We might feel that we're okay. We've got enough talent. We've got enough skills to make things happen. We're okay. But privately, we know that something's wrong. It's at a time where things are not going to get any better. And we're sort of maybe also reminded that the alternative translation of contentment is enthusiasm. Enthusiasm on its own is a waste of time. We can be as enthusiastic all we want. I can get enthusiastic about becoming a billionaire. I can get really enthusiastic about being a billionaire. Does it mean I'm going to become a billionaire? Of course not. So enthusiasm, in a way, is dangerous because it's meaningless, and contentment is about complacency. We're happy with the way things are, but we know that things are going to get worse, and that whatever the situation we're in, it's going to start to deteriorate. And this reminds us that we've got to start thinking about the future. Things are going to slide, and I'm not really talking about this in a particularly personal way necessarily. And also we have to remember this is just a reading for one day. But we must not be complacent. And going back to the previous hexagram of the cauldron, talked about broken handles. We possibly haven't really fixed those handles as well as we thought we had. We think, oh yeah, I'm going to do this. I'm going to try to get my abilities out into the open. I come up with a fix, but that fix actually isn't good enough, because we're really going to have to be able to use all of the abilities we have very soon. We mustn't be complacent about it, because right now we haven't fixed the handles. We have to fix the handles. We have to be able to really focus on the future. And that's perhaps a reminder that today there is this conjunction between Mars and Saturn. And we perhaps have to look at the lesson of Mars and Saturn, Mars conjunct Saturn. We have to absolutely focus everything we've got. And it is so important that we are not complacent. And that is a good time to move back to the astrology and to talk about Mars and Saturn again. Mars and Saturn conjunction is today. Having a Mars-Saturn in the sky, we can't really do much about it, can we? It's just the way it is. Not all of us are used to the Mars-Saturn energy. But of course, if we have a Mars-Saturn conjunction in our horoscope, it's a different matter, isn't it? We have to deal with it day in, day out. I often tell people with Mars and Saturn, with Mars-Saturn conjunctions, that they need to find a way of expressing their energy. I often tell people, things like martial arts, drumming, controlled violence. When I say violence, I mean violence in a constructive way of violence. That's how to perhaps deal with Mars and Saturn, the Mars-Saturn energy. Of course, we can see how Mars and Saturn can be difficult, because Mars is the lesser benefic, Saturn is the greater benefic. You put them together, and they can cause trouble. And Mars represents how we want to express ourselves. We can't express ourselves. It's possible in a female chart that the Mars-Saturn conjunction says something about the man in a woman's life, because Mars is a masculine planet. You put it next to Saturn. It can perhaps represent men who are negative or frustrated or angry. That's one way of looking at Mars-Saturn. And so Mars-Saturn can be quite an angry energy. But there's always a constructive way of using Mars-Saturn. And some people are able to be constructive with their Mars-Saturn. And at this stage, I want to look at some people who do have Mars-Saturn conjunctions in their horoscopes. Now, a lot of these charts I'm looking at are untimed, and I must emphasize, these are famous people. If you've got a Mars-Saturn conjunction, don't take it personally when I say something negative about a famous person with a Mars-Saturn conjunction, or an infamous person. That person is famous or infamous partly because of their Mars-Saturn conjunction. You're going to see that Mars-Saturn conjunction very often in an exaggerated way. So just don't take that too personally. So yes, it's true that Mars-Saturn conjunctions can be very constructive. Now, a person who I don't know much about, but who has a Mars-Saturn conjunction, who I don't have a time of birth for, would be Victoria Beckham, formerly of the Spice Girls, who is, of course, married to David Beckham. And she has got a Mars-Saturn conjunction. Now, she has been incredibly successful. Whatever you think of her, she has a Mars-Saturn conjunction in Gemini. You can see that her Mars-Saturn conjunction, we don't have a time of birth, potential grand trine there in air. We don't know where that moon is. But moon could be, if it's in late Aquarius, there could be grand trine there, moon, Uranus, Mars, Saturn. And she gives the impression of being, what's the word, of being quite defensive. There's certainly, she doesn't, not wanting people to get too close. Isn't that right? What did they call her? Posh spice. And she seemed a bit aloof. Maybe that's part of a Mars-Saturn image. Everything is controlled. And we might think it's bad for everything to be controlled, but sometimes if you want to be successful, you do need to be in control. I suppose she must have had a lot of control in terms of building up her career, and of the Spice Girls, I think she has been far and away the most successful and the most high profile, and she's focused on being as successful as possible, marrying David Beckham, whatever her feelings for David Beckham, I'm sure they have strong feelings for each other, whatever. But aside from that, it was certainly a good move, marrying David Beckham. It was a way to reinvent herself after the Spice Girls, and it just kept her in the public eye. And so the control there seems to be how it's working. And of course, I suppose if you want to be a singer or in music, you need a lot of self-discipline. And so she has it with the Mars-Saturn conjunction, and the control throughout her career seems to have done her a lot of good. But remember, I don't know anything about Victoria Beckham, really. I haven't done any research, but I think Victoria Beckham's horoscope, whatever you think about her, is an example of someone who is using this conjunction very well. I mean, I don't think there can be any doubts about that. Someone else who is probably using or has used the Mars-Saturn conjunction well would be Mitch McConnell. Now, Mitch McConnell, let's get this right, he is the minority leader of the Senate Republicans. And he has been in this position for ages. And he is an early Pisces. I know he's finally retiring. I think health issues have caught up with him. But he is regarded as being a very effective operator. And he has got a Mars-Saturn conjunction in Taurus. Again, don't have a time of birth for him. So if you've got a Mars-Saturn conjunction in Taurus, you can be very persistent. You can imagine this person is very much into control. He's into controlling his party. He's into controlling American politics. Mars-Saturn, very focused on getting his way and really shutting Obama down. One of the reasons Obama, I think, was a relatively unsuccessful president. I mean, he certainly wasn't very successful in terms of he got Affordable Care Act through, but he was frustrated in many respects, and he just wasn't a very experienced political operator. Unlike Mitch McConnell, with his Mars conjunct Saturn, just being really focused on what he wanted and wanting to be in control. And I think the Mars-Saturn conjunction can be about being in control. And I think clearly Victoria Beckham, with her Mars-Saturn conjunction in late Gemini, wanted to be in control. So I think it's working with Mitch McConnell. Another member of Congress who has a Mars-Saturn conjunction, who, again, no time of birth, is Elise Stefanik. She is a congresswoman who became famous for destroying Claudine Gay. So if you remember, Claudine Gay was this president of Harvard, and there was some congressional, was it a committee meeting? I don't know, inquiry, or I don't quite know what it was. And she, among other presidents of, was it MIT and somewhere else, were being asked about anti-Semitism. And Elise Stefanik's line of questioning to Claudine Gay and others really helped destroy Claudine Gay's career. And at least as president of Harvard, it was all in public. And that line of questioning was incredibly destructive for Claudine Gay. And Elise Stefanik has a conjunction between Mars and Saturn. And that might be another aspect of the Mars-Saturn square conjunction. Her Mars-Saturn is trine the Sun. So I suppose that gives it a certain amount of power. And so she was able to tear Claudine Gay to bits, but not in a sort of legal way, just by constantly asking the same question and the same kind of question, and reducing Claudine Gay just to not being able to just say anything useful, and that was the end. So that might be something about her, and I don't think she's a lawyer. And I do have some evidence that it really was her Mars-Saturn conjunction causing the damage. So if we look at Claudine Gay's chart, Claudine Gay does not have a Mars-Saturn conjunction, by the way. If we look at Claudine Gay's chart, no time of birth, sorry, I shouldn't have put any cusps in there. Let's just remove the cusps. Now, Claudine Gay seems to want to look after herself. This was the former president of Harvard. And she's aggressive in her own way, I think, because she's got a Sun-Mars conjunction in Leo. But let's put the two people's charts side by side. There is Claudine Gay's Sun-Mars conjunction in Leo. This is a woman who I think is probably pretty arrogant, inflexible, who has a high opinion of herself. And there is Elise Stefanik's Mars-Saturn conjunction. That Mars-Saturn conjunction is pretty much exactly square Claudine Gay's Sun-Mars conjunction in Leo. So we've got Elise Stefanik's fixed Mars-Saturn conjunction square Claudine Gay's fixed Sun-Mars conjunction. And of course they've got Mars square Mars. And there was an immediate clash there. Now, it may have been in a different situation that Claudine Gay would have been able to fight back. But in those congressional hearings, it seems to me, not that I know a great deal about them, but the member of Congress asking her questions seems to have a lot of control. And because Claudine Gay had no way of fighting back, or she was just ossified as far as I can see. There was no originality. She was just saying the same rote replies. And Mars and Saturn just kept attacking. If you look at those videos, Mars and Saturn and Scorpio kept attacking, attack. And that was what broke Claudine Gay. So, again, there is a positive side to Mars and Saturn. And I think that the charts of Elise Stefanik, Victoria Beckham, and Mitch McConnell do seem to show that. Another person in the news who has a Mars-Saturn conjunction is RFK, Robert Kennedy. His Mars-Saturn conjunction is pretty wide, 8 degrees. 8 degrees is quite a big margin for a Mars-Saturn conjunction. Still, he does have Mars and Saturn both in both of them in Scorpio. I think we can treat this as having a conjunction in Scorpio. So I'm not going to say much about this, but I suppose the first point, of course, his father was assassinated. And so with Mars-Saturn conjunctions, you could well have parental issues. And yes, with an assassinated father, that completely fits Mars and Saturn, although I don't have a time of birth for him, so it's really difficult to really place that Mars-Saturn conjunction in terms of what's going on in terms of his parents. It's just such a shame that I don't have a time of birth for Robert Kennedy. I suppose maybe it's available. Washington, D.C. seems to be bad at providing birth times, unlike, say, California. It might also say something about his work as an environmental lawyer. He was a very effective environmental lawyer, and I think what was he representing? Fishermen in the Hudson River, against dealing with pollution, and that may be part of Mars and Saturn. Mars and Saturn, Scorpio, can be about standing up for people. But it can also be about frustration, and we might want to look at his drug use in his early life. That might have something to do with Mars and Saturn. I suppose you could say that if you're frustrated and you're angry about something, that could lead to drugs. But I don't really want to say too much about that because I don't have a time of birth. But I think there is a suggestion there that Mars-Saturn conjunction is working. Let's now look at perhaps some of the more negative aspects of the Mars-Saturn conjunction. If we want a really extreme aspect of Mars-Saturn conjunction, perhaps Mars-Saturn conjunction at its absolute worst, then one might want to go for another lawyer. So Robert Kennedy was a lawyer. Another lawyer was Roland Frieisler. So that's his solar return. Roland Frieisler was, I believe he was president of, there's his chart. He was president of the People's Court in Nazi Germany. And, after the bomb plot, he was infamous for sentencing loads of people to death, and he was incredibly abrasive and in terms of running a court, shouting people down, and he was a thoroughly unpleasant person. He was, interestingly, he was a former communist. In the First World War, he was a prisoner of war in Russia, and with the revolution, for a time he became a communist. Then he moved over to the Nazis, and he actually witnessed Stalin's show trials. He went to see the show trials in Russia, in the Soviet Union in the 30s, and he got some ideas which he brought back when he was running the People's Court. And he has, as you can see, a Mars-Saturn, there's his Mars-Saturn conjunction, hitting the South Node as well. So you can see in this case, Mars-Saturn conjunction just is about death. That's one way of interpreting the Mars-Saturn conjunction, just death. Someone who almost revels in power and death. He, being president of a People's Court, sentencing people to death, humiliating the people in front of him, that's Mars and Saturn out of control. Now you could say that his Saturn is quite well placed in Libra. I mean, you could say that from a career perspective, but he almost got to the top of his profession, although I don't think being present with people's court is perhaps anything to be proud of. He was killed on February the 3rd, 1945, by an American bomb. The courthouse was bombed, and I think some pillar knocked him over, and his body was in the street. Apparently his body was in the street, and his body was just left there. Even the Nazis felt that he'd kind of had it coming to him. He was pretty friendless when he died. Of course, if he hadn't have been killed in that bombing, he would have been, of course, hanged after the war if he hadn't had a chance to commit suicide. But there is the Mars-Saturn conjunction at its worst. Another person who has the Mars-Saturn conjunction is Elizabeth Holmes. Elizabeth Holmes of, I got this right, Theranos fame, who produced this machine for, what was it, the machine for rapid blood tests, wasn't it, with very small amounts of blood, and it was shown to be a fake, and she's, of course, now in prison. And there's her Mars-Saturn conjunction. Not an exact Mars-Saturn conjunction, but it's certainly a Mars-Saturn conjunction. Interestingly, I don't know precisely where it is, but she's got Chiron on Algol. I thought that was interesting. Chiron within about a degree of Algol when she was born. Chiron on Algol. Chiron is the wounded healer, the healer, trying to heal people with her blood machine, but it's on Algol, the head of the demon. So I thought that was interesting. The healer who is not really a healer, perhaps. And she has no planets in fire. And she's very controlling. Apparently she really was controlling. She controlled herself, didn't she? She made her voice different. She tried to make her voice going low. Is that right? Something like that. And the whole thing was controlling. She was obsessed with being a tech billionaire, even though there was no substance. But it was all about control. It was all about image management. I believe that she drove someone to suicide. One worker. So that would seem to be Mars-Saturn at work. And there you can see that she has Sun square her Mars, Sun square her Saturn. She sort of has Sun widely square the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And no fire. Where is the life? If someone with no fire, they're looking for fire elsewhere. They're looking for inspiration from elsewhere. She hasn't got it, so she tries to get it from somewhere else. And apparently she was obsessed with Steve Jobs. And she tried to model herself on Steve Jobs. So I thought it would just be interesting to just quickly look at a comparison between her chart and that of Steve Jobs. So there is so in inner wheel we've got Elizabeth Holmes, outer wheel is Steve Jobs, and notice how Steve Jobs' Mercury is conjunct her Sun. So she's very much influenced by how Steve Jobs is, how he communicates, and she really likes the way he communicates, and how he, has his turtleneck stuff and all that. But Steve Jobs' Mercury is also square her Mars and Saturn, like her Sun. So in a way, Steve Jobs' Mercury is feeding into her Mercury-Saturn midpoint, into her Mars-Saturn conjunction, and so that sense of control that she has seems to be sort of that she had. Of course, she's now in prison, and maybe Mars-Saturn in this case may suggest an unfortunate ending. Looking at someone else who has got a Mars-Saturn conjunction, who's currently in prison, would be Sam Bankman-Fried. There's Sam Bankman-Fried. He has a Mars-Saturn conjunction in the 10th house. So we could see Mars-Saturn conjunction as being just unfortunate, We could see it as being unscrupulous in the 10th house. Certainly he had like Elizabeth Holmes, Sam Bankman-Fried had big plans. He had some big idea that he wanted to put into practice, all this. It was all supposed to be something charitable, wasn't it? You make a lot of money and then you give it back, and all that kind of nonsense that he was into. And so he has Mars-Saturn conjunction in the 10th. That's saying something about how he runs his business, perhaps. Just Mars-Saturn wants to be successful. In Aquarius, Aquarius is the big idea, the vision. I suspect that vision was real. He really thought he was helping the world out there. You make money, you give it back, all that kind of stuff. He gave a load of money to the Biden campaign, didn't he? The Biden 2020 campaign. Yeah, he has Mars-Saturn conjunction, and I suppose that Mars-Saturn conjunction says that he's unscrupulous, he's very focused, he has a vision, and it's generally unfortunate. So when you see Mars-Saturn conjunction in a famous person, it can often be unfortunate. Not always. Things look pretty good for Victoria Beckham. For Mitch McConnell had a successful political career. Elise Stefanik, at the beginning of her career, but she certainly seems to be doing well. But in Sam Bankman-Fried's case, we do have a time chart, and that Mars-Saturn conjunction is very close to his midheaven. Someone else with Mars-Saturn conjunction who, if you're into the investment world, he is a hero, absolute hero. Jesse Livermore everyone thinks he's great. Probably the most successful private investor of the 20th century. He started, I think, his private investing at the end of the 19th century. Jesse Livermore, his biography came out, Reminiscences of a Stock Operator. I really would it's really worth reading. And the thing about Jesse Livermore is that he made fortunes very quickly, and he lost fortunes very quickly. His whole life is about making an absolute ton of money, going bankrupt. Making a ton of money, going bankrupt. He just do it again and again and again and again. He kept doing it. And this probably reflects the fact that he doesn't have any Earth in his chart. Okay, he's got Neptune and Pluto, Chiron, South Node, but these are not personal social planets. They're not the traditional planets. So there's a certain lack of grounding. The money just didn't mean anything. He couldn't hold on to the money. As soon as he made a fortune, he lost it. And clearly he had a lot of intuition there, being a Leo, Sun in Leo, Mercury in Leo, Venus in Leo, his Venus trine Jupiter, Jupiter in Sagittarius, is incredibly fortunate, and he had intuition. And that's the key point. It's about not working out what you should invest in, just knowing what you should invest in. Okay, he had a system, and he had particular rules, and Reminiscences of a Stock Operator shows how he did it. But he was just when he was onto a lucky streak, he would push that. Well, not a lucky streak because he'd worked it out what he needed. He would just keep piling money into a trade that was working, and very often it was crazy. It could have gone wrong. Very often did go wrong, and that was the secret of how he was able to become so rich. Even with the Wall Street crash in 1929, he made a fortune with the Wall Street crash because I think he was taking the short side. But he has the Mars-Saturn conjunction, and I kind of think that the Mars-Saturn conjunction was in a way the secret to his success. So it's almost like he knew that if the worst came to the, it's almost like he knew that if the worst came to the worst, he could always kill himself. And he did kill himself in the end. In 1940, I think November 28th, 1940, he lost everything. Of course, the financial world after Roosevelt became president became more more structured, there were more rules. The kind of Wild West markets in which Jesse Livermore had made his fortunes and lost his fortunes had gone. And so perhaps he was no longer able to make money quickly in the way he had been in the past. And so in the end, he committed suicide. And maybe it's almost like if you are investing and you know that if it goes wrong, you can always commit suicide. I mean, maybe that just makes it easy, doesn't it? Because it allows you to just keep ploughing in, knowing, the worst comes to worst, I can always shoot myself. And perhaps with that attitude, that might have helped him make his money. And of course, he lost his money because he knew it was going to happen anyway. And that Mars-Saturn conjunction may talk about his eventual, maybe just simply referring to his eventual demise. That is possible. This is someone who committed suicide having bankrupted himself. But it also, I think, gave him a lot of resilience. He was able to deal with going bankrupt and just keep coming back, and being very persistent. But also Mars-Saturn, he couldn't hold on to his money. Okay, that might be the lack of Earth in his chart, but the Mars-Saturn is about stop-go, a frustration that always has to happen. He makes money, but it's always going to go. And Mars-Saturn might also be quite psychological. It might be his basic belief that he's always going to lose his money. So when he makes a lot of money, part of him may be just telling him, but it's always going to go wrong in the end. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So Mars-Saturn conjunction, this is a successful person, a very successful person, but is also someone who is very unsuccessful. So I think it's an interesting chart. It's just a shame I don't have a time of birth. Now, if you've got Mars-Saturn conjunction, you can also cause a lot of damage to other people, and you can perhaps destroy companies. And here's the horoscope of Alissa Heinerscheid. Now, if you remember, it was Alissa Heinerscheid. She was working with Bud Light, I think, on the marketing side, and I think she was the one who was blamed for hiring Dylan Mulvaney to be the face of Bud Light. And remember that whole trans thing. Bud Light is supposed to be a masculine brand, and she, having a trans person on the cans just really wasn't very helpful, was it? And so, yes, she has a Mars-Saturn conjunction, square Venus. And so Mars-Saturn can be about someone being able to destroy things, a whole company, losing them billions. In her career is now just about, she'll always be remembered for that, won't she? She'll never make back that millions for another company. And she's got Venus square Saturn. Now, Venus square Saturn might be about bad taste, perhaps, not understanding people, but not understanding the American public. That's a possibility. But that Mars-Saturn in Scorpio is very focused on herself and her belief about the world. And Mars-Saturn, she believes she understands the world. She's at Pisces. She's got Sun in Pisces. She's got Mars in Scorpio. It's got a lot of water there. But that water is just too subjective. She had a subjective view about what was right for Bud Light, and that subjective view ended up destroying Bud Light. One final person I want to look at is Gonzalo Lira. So Gonzalo Lira, Coach Red Pill. He was a dating coach. He made films, but he ended up in Ukraine, and he was reporting from Kharkov, and he vlogged from Kharkov, and his vlogs were very negative about Ukraine and supportive of Russia. I mean, to my mind, that sounded crazy. And this is what he did. And in the end, he got arrested and he died in a Ukrainian prison. There is a view that he was essentially killed by neglect. I mean, I don't know why the Ukrainians didn't just deport him. That's logical. I don't know why he stayed in Ukraine. I know he had a family. I think he might have had a partner and a child in Ukraine, so I think there was a motive there. But it seemed a bit crazy. He chain smoked throughout his, through a lot of his vlogs, so he was a heavy smoker. So that probably didn't help in terms of his longevity. But he did have a conjunction between Mars and Saturn, Mars and Saturn in Aries. So Mars and Saturn in Aries, being assertive, there are things he wants to do, Mars in Aries, but Saturn, there is a limitation there. And Mars-Saturn could just generally be unfortunate, undermining his own health. And undermining his own health, okay, through smoking too much, and of course through hanging around in Ukraine, that would be, when you're criticizing Ukrainian government, that would seem to be very bad for your health. And like Jesse Livermore, he didn't have much Earth in his chart. He had no Earth except for the generational planets of Uranus and Pluto. So just a sort of sense in which he doesn't have a good sense for his own safety, for what is possible, not looking after his body. That can be how lack of Earth works. But this Mars-Saturn, you could see this in terms of his vlogging, being constantly critical of Ukraine. And he just keeps going. And in a sense, that is what brought him down, that Mars-Saturn. And Mars-Saturn, yes, it can be just universally unfortunate, but it's strange, isn't it? I mean, people went on and on about Navalny dying in a Russian prison, and American journalists being imprisoned in Russia, but they didn't talk about Gonzalo Lira. It seems that the West never wanted to talk about Gonzalo Lira, and he died through neglect in a Ukrainian prison. I don't know. I mean, why didn't they just deport him? He wasn't looked after properly. But he was a bit crazy in terms of what he was doing. And there is his Mars-Saturn conjunction in Aries. Okay, those are a few charts with Mars-Saturn conjunctions. I like to think, but not all of them are negative. Some of them are pretty positive, show people who are making the most of a Mars-Saturn conjunction. Remember, these are famous people, so you're seeing the Mars-Saturn conjunction work in a rather exaggerated way. But I think by looking at these exaggerations, we can sort of bring these exaggerations perhaps down to earth and perhaps consider how they are relevant to ordinary people. Okay, so thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be grateful if you were to like it. If you are not subscribed and you enjoyed this video, I would be grateful, of course, if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. Thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.